We don't know where we come from. We don't know our story. I'm going to tell it today. Welcome to Disorganized Religion. I'm Reverend Cal. Sorry I've been out on the sabbatical, but I've got a big story to tell you today. History, boring stuff, right? So history really starts at around 3000 BC with writing. I want to tell you some stuff from before that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of our story. So before writing, history was really just a big game of hillbilly telephone, like to say. So a lot of uneducated, illiterate people would tell stories around campfires. Grandpa told his grandkids the stories that his grandpa told him, and these stories got handed down for generations. There's some weaknesses to this game of telephone. Obviously, one game of telephone, you play the game of telephone, the story changes. So you're not telling the same story your ancestors told. They've evolved over time, either on purpose or just didn't remember, right? But the biggest weakness of this is disasters. Sometimes, a flood or a fire, it wipes the chalkboard, because if Grandpa's not around to tell the stories anymore, the stories don't get handed down. So stories get lost too. But even though this happened, some stories have survived. I've recently learned Jack and the Beanstalk is the oldest story that we have. You can consistently trace it back to somewhere in Eastern Europe, Moldova, I forget where. It originated centuries, BCE. And this story was continuous over time. Jack is a story of a man who goes to the upper realm, to the world of the giants or the gods, and he destroys the gods, slays him, and steals the golden goose. So this story is, it's probably where Prometheus comes from, the Greek guy he's the guy who steals fire from the gods. So all these stories, there's lots of stories like this. So not just Prometheus and Jack, but like even Enki, or there's Polynesian stories, and there's stories of the Native Americans told of, we took technology from the gods that we weren't supposed to have. And this is it repeats all around the world, just like the statue of the gods or the aliens bringing the pine cone and the purse. The purse is the technology that they brought. So this is our story. We don't really know exactly what happened, but all these stories are telling us the same story. So here's what happened. So the humans started, depending on anthropologists who believe, anywhere from 400,000 a million years. That doesn't matter. Really, let's start our story around 70,000 BC. Reason for that is a volcano called the Toba volcano. It's in Indonesia, and this Toba volcano is a big volcano. And it spit up so much crap into the air, it killed all the plants. It damn near extincted us. So humans were down to maybe a few dozen people survived this Toba volcano in the winter that survived, that came after it. So these few dozen people, they're the ones that survived. They're the ones that started humanity. So we assume that these people were clever because they survived this volcano. So these clever few people start our story. So probably in Africa or Middle East, these clever few people, they start to expand again. And humans we were stuck around the equator because we needed to be pretty warm, and this is time when there was glaciers and it was cold up north. So up north we had some cousins named the Neanderthals. So Neanderthals were like people, cousins, a little bit more stout, more able to take the cold. So they were populating Europe. We also had some other cousins, the Denisovans. There's also the Florenses, the Hobbit people with short people. We had some cousins around this time, around 87, around 70,000 BC. We had cousins. By 40,000 BC, we ain't got no cousins anymore. So we had genocided the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the Florenses. So we'd killed every other pair of people on planet until humans were the only ones left. So that's part of our story, and we stretched out because over this time it was getting warmer. So we moved from Africa and the Middle East, and we moved and populated Europe. Nice time. So after we genocided everybody, and in 30,000 years it took us to really wipe out everybody on Earth and really start to populate the planet. we did have sex with some Neanderthals and Denisovans. There's a little bit of that DNA left in our blood. So if you're a Western European or an Eastern Asian, good chance you got a little bit of Neanderthal in ya. And there's some Pacific Islanders that have Denisovan blood. I don't think there's any Florensis blood left, but we did screw a little bit of our cousins, but when we wiped them all out. So life was starting to get good with no competition. Then it started to get cold all of a sudden. So around 11,000 BC, starts to get really, really cold. And this is what we're going to call as the Younger Dryas. So this is kind of the time period we're talking here. So the Younger Dryas is a really, really cold period, and we gather in the Persian Gulf. So there was no water this time. This is during the glaciers. The sea levels were much lower. So we're down here in the Persian Gulf trying to stay warm, living off of these the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which probably still flowed through the Persian Gulf. And this is where our story is going to start. So the oldest story we have, and not Jack, but let's talk about an older story, a story about Noah's great-grandpa Enoch. So this story came from, let's jump to 1947, a little bit fast. So let's jump up to 1947. We have a Bedouin shepherd boy in what was mandatory Palestine at the time. It wasn't the Israel mess yet. It was still Palestine. He was chasing a lost sheep or a lost goat through the mountains and threw a rock into a cave and heard a crash and went in to investigate and found a bunch of clay pots which were storing really, really old scrolls. So these scrolls passed around a little bit till they figured out what they were, and these were known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Ooh, heard of those, haven't you? So these were biblical scrolls, Jewish biblical scrolls from the Second Temple period, and a lot of these books were not in the Bible. See, these were books that were edited out over time. They were hidden here by a group called the Essenes. These are Jews. I like to call them clean hippies. So they were real pacifist, communal Jews, vegetarian likely, didn't believed in peace, and real big on cleaning, and cleaning feet especially. Big thing on cleaning feet. So these the Jews that were in charge, they didn't like these Essenes, the hippie Jews. These were the Jews in charge were really the Pharisees, who were the temple Jews, the ceremonial Jews, and then the Sadducees, which were the wealthy Jews. So these the Essenes didn't have any money or power. So they were just kind of communal hippie Jews, but they had some famous members. So they had a couple of famous guys, one known as John the Baptist, and then his successor, Yeshua, Jesus. So Jesus was an Essene. And Jesus talked a lot of shit about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, so he was definitely not one of them. And if Jesus wrote a Bible, if he actually had a Bible, he probably would have included these books that the Essenes held sacred. But the Romans, they didn't trust Jesus so much. They trusted the Pharisees more. So when they put together the Bible, they edited out some of these books that Jesus would have left in. So to be a Christian today, you've got to ignore the books that Jesus didn't ignore. So that makes a lot of sense, right? So that is, except for there's a few churches in Africa, Christian churches like the Ethiopian and Somalian churches, they include these old books. The Book of Jubilee, and one book I want to talk about in particular is one book called the Book of Enoch. So this Book of Enoch, it tells a story. This is the story I want to focus on, the story of the Watchers. So you may have heard that term before, the story of the Watchers. This is the story is Yahweh thinks we need some babysitters, right? So Yahweh sends down 200 babysitters to us to keep an eye on people, make sure we're not doing anything too wrong. So this is around 10,000 BC this happens. They decide, these Watchers come down, and they decide, hey, Dad's away for the weekend, fuck the rules, let's throw a party. So they decide immediately to break the rules, and they decide they're going to get them some women. So they find some women to copulate with, and they make some babies, and these babies grow up to be giants called the Nephilim. So Nephilim, that's where that came from, is the Watchers were screwing the women, so not good. So that they also did some things they shouldn't have done. So these Nephilim, besides getting it on with some women, they also taught people some stuff that we weren't supposed to know. So these are the technologies that they taught us. So they taught us some things about magic spells and magic potions and root potions. And they taught us some things about astrology. And that's where astrology comes from. So all those ancient astrology, that's where it came from. Those are the Watchers. Maybe we didn't remember it perfectly, but they taught us that stuff, and we weren't supposed to learn those things. But those are those are some harmless things, harmless fun. But Azazel, he's one of the Watchers, and he really fucks up. He teaches us some stuff that really kind of screws us up really, really badly. So first of all, he thinks human women are a little bit too plain. You can make them more beautiful. So he teaches them about how to use makeup and how to use jewelry. So how to take these precious metals and all these dyes and color your face certain colors and dangle all these jewels from yourself to make yourself more beautiful. So it teaches women to wear makeup and wear jewelry. So I guess we weren't supposed to know that. But men, he really fucks with. So men, he teaches us some things we weren't supposed to know about metallurgy. So he teaches us how to mine metals, how to make metals, and how to turn them into shields and weapons. Seems like a bad thing to teach people. So we didn't have weapons. All of a sudden, we've got swords and shields. What are people going to do with a whole bunch of swords and shields? So that didn't go that well. So before too long, Earth is screwed. The people are full of war. They're fighting and killing each other. There's these rampaging giants, laying waste to everything. So obviously these Watchers are not doing a great job watching. So Yahweh gets pissed off. He sends down 4 archangels to clean some shit up. So these 4 guys, these 4 archangels, this is Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Donatello. Not Donatello, I'm just kidding about that. That was Raphael and Gabriel. So Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel come down and they dispense some judgment. So most of them, they chase down Shemyaza and the other Watchers, and they bind them all together, wrap them up, and they're made to watch as the Nephilim are destroyed. All their little baby giants, they get destroyed. So Nephilim are wiped out. Nephilim, actually, they get to live on as evil spirits. So we have demon possessions. It's a Nephilim. That's good to know, right? So these Shemyaza and the others, Shemyaza is the leader of these Watchers. They're just bound together and put into the earth. But Azazel, he gets some special treatment because he fucked with his God's special creatures. He fucked with the humans. So Raphael specifically goes after Azazel and puts his size up his ass. Raphael kicks some ass. So Raphael takes Azazel and he hog ties him, ties his hands and his feet together, and he throws him onto some sharp rocks in the desert. Pretty rough. And then Azazel is made to stay there on the rocks until Judgment Day, in which he is to be cast into fire. So he is to be given the ultimate punishment because he messed with humans. So Azazel, discuss him for a moment. Now, he's a rebellious angel. He leads a rebellion from heaven, and he's thrown into the fire because he corrupts man. And even Enoch calls him, he's the adversary. He's responsible for all sin. The word Satan actually means adversary. Do you think we're talking about the same person here? Probably. You think we're talking about the same being, Azazel? So that's really the story of the Watchers. But after all this punishment, Yahweh decides, let's flood the earth. And then they mention this great flood in Genesis, but they aren't really specific as to why. Well, this is why. So they say a biblical scholar will tell you all this stuff happened, 3000 BC or later. It's all kind of jammed into there. But I will tell you this happened much, much earlier. So if we look at the global temperature around the planet, there's a spike. So we're here in the Younger Dryas. All of a sudden, temperature spikes, and we went from ice age to normal in a few years. Causes lots and lots of stuff to melt. So the earth jumps in temperature. What happens to the sea levels? So the sea levels in the Persian Gulf, they jump, and all of a sudden society that we knew is buried in mud and water. So really, there's probably a lot of stuff buried in the mud into the Persian Gulf. This flood may also be talking about the Black Sea. It refilled, so it was empty at one point. It was refilling. Or could be talking about a tsunami flooding the Mediterranean Sea. There's a few different schools of thought or stories, but those are for another time. But now let's talk about after the flood. So with Noah or Ziazudra, depending on who you're asking, survives the flood. Boat lands on Mount Ararat, which is in Turkey, eastern Turkey, near the Black Sea. So one of the first things Noah does when he lands the ark is he builds an altar. So I think Noah was thinking, hey, maybe we should learn some lessons for what we just been through and not let that happen again. So Noah, he tries to create a religion, a new one. But after Noah, history, it goes dark a little bit. Something happens. So let's fill in kind of the gap here. So if we look at the Mount Ararat, we go a few hundred miles west, we get to a place called, the Turks call Potbelly Hill, or in their language it's called Gobleki Tepe. So this is just a giant mound of dirt. And we didn't know much about it till the early 80s. They started to dig what they thought was a cemetery. They kept digging, and holy shit, they dug a temple. And not a small temple. They're not even close to finished excavating this, but this whole site is 22 acres large. So an acre is a football field. So 22 football fields large. Some of these temple areas are over 50 feet tall with stone columns. And the stuff, it's 11 to 12,000 years old. That really puts a monkey wrench into history, because this isn't supposed to be here. These things are massive. Like I said, nearly 50 feet tall with pillars, and they're intricate. They have artistic art, like 3D art carved into the columns, coming out of the columns at you. It's incredible to think about. We'd have a hard time doing this stuff today. And history says this is hunter-gatherers that did this with sticks and stones. They didn't even have metals. It'd be another 7,000 years before it said they invented bronze. And the really funny thing about this, Göbekli Tepe and a lot of other areas like this, is you can age the stuff as they built this over time, and as they built stuff newer, they had less technology, they had less intricacy, it was less skill over time. They were losing technology. And we see this in Egypt also. The oldest Egyptian artifacts are the most intricate. The stuff we could have a hard time recreating, and then as we go on, we get more common stuff. So something happened. We had this great technology, then stuff is lost. And not just lost. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. This massive 22-acre site was buried under dirt on purpose. And there's other sites in the area, other similar temples that have also been intentionally buried. So around 8,000 BCE, our story starts to get dark, real dark. So this is about when you start to see these mounds getting buried. And our story comes from not written history, not even stories, but it comes from our DNA. So DNA is funny stuff. I get DNA, from my parents, but there's some DNA I get from only my mom, and there's some DNA I get from only my dad. So the mitochondrial DNA I get from mom, and the Y chromosome I get from my dad. So this DNA tells our story. This is why we know about the Toba volcano, why it nearly killed us, because it's called a bottleneck. Everybody we found after that period was related to the people we found that period. So it tells us that there was a few people that had everybody else. So if we look around this time period I'm calling the dark period, not much is happening with mitochondrial DNA with mom, but not a lot is happening with the Y chromosome. We're seeing a bottleneck. So we're seeing a phenomenon where very, very few boys were reproducing. So it got to be the point where it was one boy in 17 grew to reproduce and had kids of their own. So math ain't mathin' here. One guy is impregnating a lot of women, and lots of guys are getting nothing. So for 4,000 years, as Maury Povich would say, you are not the father. Very, very few of us were going to be the father. What does this mean? What does this look like? It looks like nomadic clans. Really, clans where the rule is the strongest rules. And the strongest clan rules the day, and everybody, you get in line or you die. So they took these clans, they buried these temples. They didn't want people to know the rules. Fuck the rules. Join this clan or die. And you can join the clan, but only the boss fucks. You want to join the clan and we'll keep you safe. You can go ahead, but only the big guy fucks. So get into a situation where really you had sort of polygamy taken to an extreme. And you kind of wonder, knowing this, is this why men seem less evolved than women? Why men seem to be kind of like a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too barbarianish? Maybe it's because our ancestors for thousands of years were only the rapists that got to survive. all these nice guys, the good guys, the real nice guys you're looking for, that was in those thousands of years. Maybe they didn't make it out because they were too nice. So that's the problem, is our great-great-great-grandpas are a bunch of rapist barbarians. So this whole nightmare starts to fade by about 4000 BC, so thousands of years of darkness, and we start to get a little bit of light with the city of Sumer. So this is the first city that was really grew big enough to defend themselves against the barbarians of the world, and actually created a society again, created a civilization. And these people remembered enough of these stories, for thousands of years, that they reestablished what Noah was trying to build. They took some of these stories and built a belief system, built a religion out of them. This is where the memory of the Elohim come from. A lot of the Old Testament, this is where it comes from, was from these people in Sumeria, these Sumerians. And these people brought agriculture, and they created justice, and they created society. They destroyed the strongest person survives. And this is where Western society starts from. This is where Judean stories, this is where ethics come from. These are the people that created us. So we have to tip our hat to the Sumerians, because they wouldn't be here otherwise. But these stories that they tell us, they survive for a reason. They remembered these stories, they told these stories, they shared them for a reason. So no matter if we're talking about Jack and the Beanstalk, or Prometheus, or Noah, Ziazudra, or Enki, the story goes is that, we're good, but we have technology that maybe is too much for us, that gives us some dangerous power. And that power, it can create some terrible things and turn us into terrible people if we don't have humility. So that's what a lot of these stories teach us. That's what the story of Gilgamesh teaches. It teaches humility. Even when you're the most powerful, you should be the most humble. Azazel gave us the ability to make these terrible weapons. And have we learned from this story? Have we learned, or is the most powerful military on earth bullying, puffing their chest, and creating misery around the globe, and sitting on enough weapons to eradicate us all 10 times over? It's safe to say that's not humility. And it's safe to say we haven't learned. Maybe Jesus was right. Humans needed to hear Enoch's story, because maybe it would teach us a little bit of humility.